The room was buzzing, though not in the loud, chaotic way of a crowded city street. It was the kind of quiet excitement that fills a place when people are waiting for something they've been looking forward to. Families shuffled into their seats, friends whispered to each other, and a few people glanced around, curious to see who would be performing first. It was a small community hall, not much bigger than a classroom, but it had a charm of its own. The wooden floor creaked slightly under the weight of footsteps, and the sunlight streaming through the tall windows made the dust motes float like tiny dancers in the air. Everyone was here for the local talent night. Some were parents who had come to support their children. Others were neighbors, and a few were music enthusiasts who didn't miss a single performance. On the small stage at the front, a polished grand piano stood waiting, its black surface gleaming under the warm lights. The audience's chatter quieted as the next performer stepped up. She was small, not in a way that drew attention, but enough that her presence seemed almost fragile. She carried herself carefully, with a quietness that made people underestimate her. Her hair was tied back simply, and she wore a modest dress. She didn't speak much. She didn't need to. People who had seen her perform before knew she preferred to let the music speak. Tonight, however, nobody expected anything extraordinary. Most assumed she would play something familiar, a simple tune, something safe and predictable, the kind of performance that wouldn't make anyone uncomfortable or leave anyone stunned. She approached the piano and sat down. Her fingers hovered above the keys for a moment, almost frozen, as if she were gathering courage. Some in the audience whispered softly, "She looks nervous," while others smiled politely, expecting a gentle, straightforward melody. The judges, seated in the front row, were seasoned musicians, and they had heard countless performances just like this one. They exchanged quiet nods, waiting for the first few notes that would confirm their expectations. Then she placed her hands on the keys, and the first sound floated through the room. It was soft, delicate, almost hesitant, and it matched what everyone had been expecting. But even in those first notes, there was something different, something that didn't quite fit the pattern of a simple tune. Her fingers moved with precision, but there was a subtle unpredictability, a slight rise and fall in the rhythm that hinted at something more. The audience leaned forward slightly in their seats, not realizing yet that what they were about to hear would change everything. As she played, the melody began to unfold in ways that no one anticipated. What started as a gentle, familiar tune began to twist and turn, weaving through unexpected harmonies and subtle pauses that caught the ear. It wasn't just a song. It was a story being told without words. The music painted pictures in the mind sunlight streaming through leaves, the quiet flutter of birds taking flight, the soft ripple of water over smooth stones. People in the audience felt themselves drawn into it, caught in a current they hadn't seen coming. The nervousness that had been visible just moments before seemed to melt away with each note. Her posture straightened, her movements became more confident, and her eyes, though mostly focused on the keys, shone with a quiet intensity. She was no longer just a small, shy performer. She was a storyteller, and the piano was her voice. Every chord, every subtle change in tempo, was like a word in a sentence, a phrase in a paragraph, a chapter in a story that unfolded in real time. Some in the audience glanced at each other, their expressions changing from polite interest to genuine curiosity. Others had stopped whispering altogether, mesmerized by what they were hearing. The judges, usually quick to critique and evaluate, were silent, their brows slightly furrowed in concentration as they listened, clearly trying to keep up with something that was defying their expectations. It was remarkable how music could do this, how it could take a group of strangers, sitting quietly in a hall, and make them feel like they were part of something personal and intimate. She was telling her story, and somehow, without speaking, without explanation, everyone in the room felt like they were listening just for them. People who had been fidgeting in their seats were now sitting still, captivated. Children, usually restless at events like this, had stopped whispering or looking around. Their attention was completely fixed on the movement of her hands. The rise and fall of the melody, the tune began to grow richer, fuller, more intricate. What had seemed simple at first now revealed layers of depth. The quiet opening had given way to chords that resonated in the chest, vibrating in a way that made the audience feel the music physically, not just hear it. There was a rhythm to it, a pulse that seemed to echo in the heartbeat of everyone listening. And yet, despite its complexity, it remained graceful, delicate, never overwhelming. It was clear that every note, every pause, every subtle variation had been chosen with care. No one had expected this. People had come thinking they would hear a gentle performance, something pleasant but unremarkable. Instead, they were witnessing a moment that felt rare, fragile, and beautiful all at once. They didn't just hear the music, they felt it. It stirred memories, emotions, and thoughts they hadn't anticipated. Some closed their eyes, letting the sound wash over them. Others watched her hands, amazed at the skill and fluidity with which she moved across the keys. Every finger seemed to have a mind of its own, but perfectly in sync with her intent. The room was no longer just a hall filled with people. It had become a shared space of experience. Strangers connected through the music, each person interpreting it in their own way, yet all feeling the same sense of awe. Laughter, whispers, and polite coughing had disappeared. Even the creaking floorboards and the hum of the lights seemed to fade into the background, leaving only the sound of the piano and the story it was telling. As the first part of the tune came to a close, there was a brief, stunned silence. People weren't sure if they were allowed to applaud yet. Some caught their breath, trying to process what had just happened. She lifted her hand slightly from the keys, paused, and then leaned forward, ready to continue. It was clear that this was only the beginning. The audience, sensing that something extraordinary was unfolding, leaned in closer, waiting, almost holding their breath, for the next part of the story to come alive. There was a quiet thrill in the air, a shared anticipation. Everyone knew they were witnessing something special, even if they couldn't yet put it into words. This performance was breaking the rules of expectation gently but undeniably. It was proof that something or someone could surprise you in the most unexpected way, turning what seemed ordinary into something unforgettable. And for the first time that evening, the audience wasn't just listening to music. They were experiencing it, living it, and feeling it in a way that would stay with them long after the last note faded. Even from the back of the hall, it was easy to see the change in the room. People who had come casually, expecting nothing more than a pleasant evening, were now fully present, completely absorbed. Conversations had stopped, phones had been tucked away, and all eyes were on the small figure at the piano, her hands moving with a grace and purpose that seemed far beyond her years. There was a quiet power in her performance, a kind of magic that made it impossible to look away or think about anything else, and she knew it. Not in a boastful way, but in the calm confidence that comes from pouring your heart into something you love. She felt the music in her own body, letting it guide her fingers, her hands, her entire being. Every note mattered, every pause was meaningful, and every chord carried emotion. She wasn't playing to impress anyone. She was playing because this was who she was, and tonight, the world was listening. By the end of the first part of her performance, it was clear to everyone in the hall that they had been completely wrong in their assumptions. They had expected a simple tune, something polite and quiet. What they were hearing was something alive, something full of depth and feeling, and it was impossible to ignore. For the first time that evening, the audience wasn't just spectators. They were part of a shared experience, connected to each other through the music and through the story. She was telling with every touch of the piano keys. And in that moment, as the last notes of the first section lingered in the air like soft echoes, a sense of wonder spread through the hall. Everyone knew that this was only the beginning, and though no one could predict exactly where it would go next, they all silently agreed this was going to be a night to remember. The hall had fallen into a kind of quiet magic, the kind that makes you forget the world outside. The first few notes had already surprised everyone, but now, as her fingers returned to the keys, it became clear that the performance was about to take a turn no one had expected. The melody deepened, moving in directions that felt both familiar and completely new at the same time. It was like walking down a path you thought you knew and suddenly discovering a hidden garden full of colors and scents you had never imagined. Her hands moved with increasing confidence, each key struck with purpose yet flowing effortlessly. The music began to change its mood, shifting from soft and contemplative to something more lively, almost playful. There was a rhythm to it now, a gentle swing that made the audience sit up a little straighter, as if the music was nudging them forward. Some people tapped their feet softly, caught in the subtle beat, while others closed their eyes, letting the sound wash over them. The quiet hall seemed to breathe with her, every note filling the space with life. What was remarkable was how completely she commanded the attention of everyone in the room. There was no flashy showmanship, no exaggerated gestures, pure music flowing naturally. And yet, it held a power that could not be ignored. It wasn't loud or forceful, but it reached straight to the heart. Parents who had brought their children whispered to them in awe, saying quietly, "Listen carefully. This is something special." Children, who often fidget at performances, were completely still, their eyes wide as they followed the movement of her hands and the dance of the notes. The tune began to evolve further, adding layers that were unexpected but beautiful. The melody twisted and turned, rising and falling in ways that made the audience lean in closer, as if trying to understand the story hidden in each chord. It was more than just music. It was a conversation, a dialogue that didn't need words. Each note seemed to speak to something inside, stirring emotions that no one had anticipated. Some felt a sudden swell of happiness, others a tinge of nostalgia, and a few even felt tears threaten to spill. Everyone was experiencing it differently, yet all were equally captivated. The audience could feel the intensity growing. It wasn't just in the sound. It was in the way she carried herself, the way her body moved slightly with the rhythm, the small, almost imperceptible expressions that crossed her face. There was focus, yes, but also joy, a quiet joy that seemed to radiate from her and reach the people in the room. It was a reminder that music wasn't just something to hear. It was something to feel, something that could make people forget their worries for a little while and be completely present in the moment. Judges, who were known for their critical eyes, were no longer writing notes or whispering to each other. They had stopped moving, fully absorbed. They weren't just evaluating anymore. They were experiencing. Some leaned forward slightly, their eyes fixed on her hands, clearly impressed by the skill, the creativity, and the emotion poured into every note. They had come expecting a simple, pleasant performance, but now they were witnessing something far beyond ordinary. The piano itself seemed to come alive under her touch. The keys spoke in whispers and shouts, in gentle caresses and bold declarations. The sound filled every corner of the hall, wrapping around each person and drawing them deeper into the music. The way she played made it seem effortless, but anyone who truly listened could sense the years of practice, the countless hours spent learning to control every nuance. Yet despite all the skill, it never felt mechanical. Every note was alive, every pause meaningful. As the music moved forward, there were moments that made people lean closer in anticipation, holding their breath to catch the next unexpected twist. A sudden shift in tempo, a soft chord played in a surprising rhythm. These were little moments of brilliance that kept everyone on edge, hanging on to each sound. There was no predictability, no sense that they could relax. They didn't want to relax. They wanted to be caught in the wave of sound, carried along with the story she was telling through the piano. The audience began to notice the subtle details, the things that could have been missed if one wasn't paying close attention. The slight lift of a finger, the gentle slide across the keys, the tiny pauses that seemed almost accidental but were perfectly placed. All of it created an emotional tapestry that was impossible to ignore. It felt intimate, like they were being let into a private moment, a secret shared only through music. There was a sense of wonder in the air, an unspoken agreement that what they were witnessing was rare and precious. Her expression changed slightly as she played, reflecting the shifts in the music. At times, her face softened with gentleness, mirroring the tender notes that floated through the hall. At other times, it hardened with intensity, matching the bold chords that seemed to shake the floor beneath her fingers. There was no performance, no acting, just the pure honesty of someone expressing themselves through music. And that honesty, so rare and raw, was exactly what made the audience sit in complete awe. Some in the crowd were moved to lean toward each other, exchanging whispers of amazement. "Did you hear that?" one person asked, their voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," came the quiet reply. "I've never heard anything like this before." Children, usually the hardest to impress, were completely absorbed, some tilting their heads as if trying to understand where the music was taking them. Every listener was caught in a shared experience, yet everyone felt it in their own personal way. It was in these moments that the music took on a life of its own. It wasn't just coming from her hands. It seemed to grow from the air itself, wrapping around the audience and pulling them into the story. There was a rhythm, a heartbeat that everyone could feel, subtle but undeniable. The room, once filled with casual chatter and anticipation, was now completely still, hanging on to every note, every chord, every soft pause that seemed to stretch time itself. Her fingers flew across the keys, moving faster now, yet each note was perfectly clear. The complexity of the piece was incredible, but it never felt confusing or overwhelming. Instead, it felt like a dance, a conversation between the piano and the room, between her and the audience. The music had a flow that felt natural, like it had been there all along, waiting to be discovered. Each crescendo built on the one before, leading to moments that took everyone's breath away, leaving them in awe of what they were hearing. Even the air seemed to change. There was a tangible energy in the hall, a mixture of surprise, admiration, and quiet excitement. People shifted in their seats, leaning forward, trying to catch every nuance. Some clasped their hands together, as if holding themselves steady against the wave of emotion washing over them. Others simply sat, completely still, letting the music fill every corner of their minds. There was laughter, not loud but soft and delighted, escaping in moments when the music tickled something deep inside. And there were sighs of wonder, tiny exhalations that punctuated the silence between notes. Time seemed to stretch. It was impossible to say how long the piece had been playing, because the world outside the hall no longer existed. There were no clocks, no phones, no distractions, only the sound of the piano and the way it touched everyone who listened. People forgot to blink, forgot to shift in their seats, forgotten that life existed beyond this room. For the audience, the music had become a living thing, something bigger than themselves, something that demanded attention and respect. And yet, for all its power, the music was never overwhelming. It had moments of quiet, moments where a single note would hang in the air, soft and delicate, and everyone would lean in to catch it. Those quiet moments made the louder ones even more intense, the crescendos more thrilling, the shifts more profound. It was a lesson in patience, in listening, in understanding that beauty often comes in contrasts, in the interplay of silence and sound, of soft and loud, of expected and unexpected. By the end of this second part, the audience was completely captivated. Their minds were engaged, their hearts were full, and they felt an unspoken connection to her and to each other. They had come expecting a simple tune, a gentle performance, and instead they were part of something extraordinary. The room had transformed, filled not just with sound, but with emotion, wonder, and a sense of shared experience that would stay with them long after the last note faded. She paused briefly, letting her hands hover above the keys, breathing just slightly. The hall was quiet, waiting, aware that the best was not behind them but still unfolding. And in that quiet pause, everyone felt it, the knowledge that what they had seen and heard so far was only the beginning. They had been caught in a moment, and moments like this, rare and beautiful, were the ones people remembered forever. The music had already captured everyone's attention, but now it began to transform into something even more powerful. What had started as a delicate tune, surprising in its subtle beauty, was evolving into a full, rich expression that no one had anticipated. Her fingers moved faster yet gracefully, dancing over the keys in patterns that seemed both planned and spontaneous at the same time. Each note seemed alive, carrying emotion directly to the hearts of everyone listening. The atmosphere in the hall had shifted. Where there had once been polite curiosity, now there was awe. People leaned forward in their seats, eyes fixed on the performer, as if afraid to blink and miss a single movement. Even the smallest gestures, how her wrist flexed slightly, the way she arched her fingers at the right moment felt deliberate, full of meaning, like silent words woven into the melody. It was no longer just a song. It was a story unfolding in real time, and the audience could feel themselves drawn into it. The tune had grown more intricate. Simple melodies gave way to flowing, complex sequences of notes that twisted and turned in unexpected ways. The sound swelled and receded like waves in the ocean, soft and gentle at times, and bold and crashing at others. Every person in the room could feel it, not just hear it. Some felt a rush of excitement that made their hearts race. Others felt a gentle sadness hidden within the music, a longing that tugged at their chest. Even those who had come casually, expecting nothing more than light entertainment, were now entirely absorbed. Caught in the spell she was casting, it was amazing how someone so small, so quiet in presence, could command such power through music. There was no shouting, no dramatic theatrics, no exaggerated gestures, only the pure emotion of her playing, reaching out to each listener directly. It reminded everyone that true talent doesn't need to be loud. It only needs to be real. Each note was a whisper and a shout at the same time, carrying the story of someone who had practiced, struggled, and dreamed for years, and now was sharing that journey with the world. The hall was completely silent except for the piano. Even the faint creaks of the wooden floor and the subtle hum of the lights seemed to vanish, as though the music had claimed every corner of the room. People leaned closer, some resting their elbows on their knees, completely focused on the sound. A few children leaned their heads against their parents' arms, entranced, their usual restlessness gone. There was a shared understanding among everyone present they were witnessing something rare, something that went beyond mere notes and rhythm. It was a moment that would linger in memory long after the performance ended. The piece grew bolder. The soft, flowing melodies were now joined by chords that rang with intensity, filling the hall with vibrations that could be felt in the chest as well as the ears. It was as if the piano itself had become alive, its voice echoing through the space, demanding attention and respect. Her hands moved so quickly that it was hard to follow every movement, yet each note landed perfectly, creating harmony from what seemed like chaos. The audience couldn't help but marvel at the skill and passion being poured into every sound. Even the judges, who were often careful not to show too much emotion, were visibly moved. Some leaned forward, their eyes wide, scribbling furiously on their notepads before they could stop themselves, trying to capture what words could never fully describe. Others simply sat, their faces a mixture of astonishment and admiration, watching her create something extraordinary from a simple black and white keyboard. They had come expecting a safe, polite performance. Instead, they were being swept away by music that was alive. Unpredictable and utterly captivating, the music began to tell a story in a way that words never could. There were moments of gentle calm, where a single note hung in the air, soft and tender, making hearts swell with quiet emotion. And there were moments of sudden intensity, where rapid sequences of notes collided and intertwined, creating a sense of urgency and exhilaration. It was as if she were speaking directly to the audience, sharing feelings that could not be spoken, telling secrets that only music could reveal. Every person in the hall felt a connection, each in their own way, and yet all were united by the same experience. Her movements became more expressive, though still natural and unforced. Her body swayed slightly with the rhythm, her face shifting with the emotions she was expressing. It was easy to see when the music was joyful, playful, or full of longing. Each subtle change in posture, each slight shift of her hands, added depth to the performance, making it more than just sound. It was an experience. People were drawn into it without realizing how deeply, letting themselves be carried by the ebb and flow of the music. The piece seemed endless yet perfectly balanced. Every note built upon the last, creating tension and release in a way that kept the audience on edge and fully engaged. There was no predictability. Every turn in the melody was a surprise, a new discovery, yet it all felt natural, as though the music had been meant to be exactly this way all along. Some people gasped softly at unexpected harmonies while others closed their eyes, letting the music paint pictures in their imagination. It was impossible to resist being swept away. Children who had been shy or distracted at the beginning were now completely captivated. Some tilted their heads, watching in fascination as her fingers flew across the keys. Others pressed their small hands together, as if holding themselves steady against the beauty they were feeling. Even adults, often hardened by daily worries and routines, found themselves leaning in, caught up in a sense of wonder that made them forget the world outside. It was a rare gift, this kind of music, and everyone could feel it. The intensity continued to build. The soft, flowing melodies were now layered with bold, dramatic chords that filled every corner of the room. The sound bounced off the walls and ceiling, vibrating through the wooden floor and creating a rhythm that made hearts pound in unison. It was no longer just a performance. It was an experience, a journey through emotion and imagination that transported everyone present into a world of sound. The audience could feel the energy, the passion, the joy, and the longing all at once. There were moments that made people lean forward instinctively, as if trying to catch a fleeting secret hidden in the notes. Moments of quiet reflection, where a single key rang out like a bell, hung in the air, and left a soft echo in their hearts. Moments of intensity, where her hands moved faster than the eye could follow, yet each sound was clear, perfect, and meaningful. Each twist and turn of the melody held them in suspense, making them wonder what would come next. Even as the music grew more complex, it never lost its humanity. It was not a display of skill for the sake of skill. Every note, every chord, every pause had meaning. It carried emotion, intention, and a story that only the piano could tell. The audience felt it intuitively, without needing explanation. It was as if the performer had reached inside each listener and pulled out feelings they didn't know they were carrying. Some felt joy, others nostalgia, others an ache of longing, and some simply marveled at the beauty of it all. The room itself seemed transformed. What had been a simple hall filled with chairs and sunlight was now a space alive with music and emotion. The audience was no longer separate from the performance. They were part of it, connected through every note. Every gasp, every quiet sigh, every soft exclamation of wonder was part of the experience. The music had woven them together, creating a bond between strangers. A shared understanding that this was something rare and extraordinary. She played with confidence now, fully in command of the music and of herself. There was a sparkle in her eyes, a quiet smile that appeared briefly as if acknowledging the audience's awe. She didn't need to speak. Her music said everything. Every hand movement, every subtle shift in her posture, every pause and crescendo told the story. And the audience responded silently with full attention. Completely caught in the magic of the moment. By the end of this third part, it was clear that the performance was no longer about expectation. The audience had come anticipating a simple, gentle tune, and instead they had been given something living, breathing, and profound. They could feel every emotion, every story hidden in the music. It was impossible not to be affected. Some sat in silent amazement, while others exchanged glances of disbelief, sharing in the wonder without needing words. Everyone knew they were witnessing something unforgettable, something that would linger in memory long after the hall emptied. And as she paused for a brief moment, letting her hands hover above the keys, the audience held its collective breath. No one moved, no one whispered, no one dared to break the spell. They knew instinctively that the story was not yet over, that the next notes would carry them even further, deeper into the music. And in that quiet anticipation, every person felt a thrill, a sense of awe, and the simple, undeniable truth that they were witnessing something extraordinary. The music had grown so powerful that it felt as if it had taken over the room. What had started as a soft, gentle melody was now a wave of sound that carried every listener along with it. The audience could feel the vibrations in their chest, a rhythm that seemed to echo their own heartbeat. Every note struck with precision, yet it was full of feeling. Every pause, every crescendo, every soft trill had meaning, and everyone could sense it. Her fingers moved faster now, yet with a control that was mesmerizing. Each note landed perfectly, flowing into the next as if the music had its own life. It was no longer just a tune. It had become a story that unfolded before everyone's eyes, and yet it was silent except for the piano. People leaned forward instinctively, drawn in by the energy, by the way the music seemed to reach inside them and pull out emotions they hadn't expected to feel. The room itself seemed alive. The sunlight streaming through the windows fell on the polished surface of the piano, catching on every curve and edge, making it gleam. Dust particles floated lazily in the light, almost dancing to the rhythm of the music. Even the walls seemed to hum softly with the vibrations, carrying the sound to the farthest corners of the hall. It was as though the music had transformed the space into something magical, something bigger than just a performance. The melody grew louder, fuller, more intense. The gentle passages that had opened the evening were now replaced with chords that rang like bells, resonant and bright. The rhythm pulsed like a heartbeat, driving the piece forward, keeping everyone on edge. People in the audience found themselves holding their breath at moments of suspense, leaning closer to catch every note. Even those who had come thinking it would be a simple performance were now completely caught in the music. Unable to look away or think about anything else, her hands moved in a blur at times, striking keys with rapid precision, yet each note was clear and meaningful. It was easy to see the years of practice and dedication behind every movement, and yet it didn't feel mechanical. It felt alive. The music was breathing, expanding, and the performer seemed to channel something deep and personal into every sound. There was joy in it, yes, but also a quiet intensity. A kind of urgency that made the audience lean in closer, almost unconsciously. Trying to understand what she was expressing, the dynamics of the piece shifted constantly. Soft, tender notes gave way to bold, dramatic chords. Gentle, flowing passages suddenly became lively and energetic. Every transition was seamless, yet surprising, keeping the listeners completely engaged. There was no predictability, no pattern they could cling to. It was as if the music itself was alive, guiding them, taking them on a journey, and there was no way to resist being swept along. Some people gasped softly at the unexpected turns in the music. Others whispered quietly to themselves, almost in disbelief, marveling at the skill and emotion poured into each phrase. Children sat perfectly still, eyes wide, captivated by the rapid movements of her hands and the way the sound filled the room. Adults leaned forward, some with mouths slightly open, unable to hide their astonishment. Every person in the hall, no matter their age or background, was part of this shared experience, connected in a way that only music can make possible. Her expression reflected the music. At times, her face softened, matching the tender, gentle notes that floated across the room. At other times, her eyes sparkled with intensity, her brow slightly furrowed, matching the bold, dramatic chords that shook the hall. It was natural, unforced, and completely honest. She wasn't performing for applause or recognition. She was performing because this was who she was and the music was her voice. Every person watching could feel that honesty, and it made the experience even more moving. The piece reached its emotional climax. The gentle notes that had begun the performance were now joined by powerful chords, creating a sound that filled every corner of the hall. The rhythm became faster, more urgent, carrying with it a sense of exhilaration. The audience could feel it in their bones, a vibration that was both thrilling and moving. Hearts raced, breaths caught, and for a few minutes, it felt as if the world outside the hall had disappeared completely. The music wasn't just heard. It was felt. It moved through the audience like a wave, touching everyone differently but leaving no one untouched. Some felt joy, some felt nostalgia, some felt a gentle sadness, and yet all felt awe. There were moments that made people lean forward instinctively, as if trying to catch something fleeting, something they might forget if they didn't pay attention. And then there were moments that made people exhale softly, letting the beauty of the sound wash over them. Lingering long after the notes had faded, even the judges, usually so composed, were visibly moved. Some scribbled notes furiously, trying to capture what words could not describe. Others simply sat in silence, faces wide with admiration, watching a performer who had taken a simple piano and turned it into a vessel for emotion, a storyteller that spoke directly to the heart. They had come expecting a polite, safe performance, and instead were being given a moment that was extraordinary in every sense. The audience could feel the crescendo building, the tension rising. Each chord seemed to stretch time, creating a sense of anticipation, as if the music itself were holding its breath before releasing. It was impossible not to be carried along, swept up in a journey that felt personal yet universal. The music had become a living thing, and everyone in the hall was part of it, sharing in the experience. Feeling it together, her hands moved with incredible speed and precision now, yet each note was meaningful. There was a rhythm that was almost like a heartbeat, connecting the music to the audience in a subtle, powerful way. Every phrase was deliberate, yet it flowed naturally as if the music were improvising itself, guided by an unseen hand. The audience leaned in closer, captivated by the skill and emotion on display. Some whispered softly, "I've never heard anything like this," while others simply sat, eyes closed, letting the sound carry them away. The intensity of the performance made the hall feel alive. The polished wooden floor seemed to vibrate under the power of the chords. The sunlight streaming through the windows created patterns on the walls that shifted with the music, almost like dancing shadows. Even the air felt different, charged with energy, anticipation, and awe. People became aware of their own breathing, of the quiet sighs and whispers around them, of the way the music had transformed the room into something extraordinary. There were moments of complete stillness, where a single note would hang in the air, soft and delicate, and everyone would hold their breath. Then, without warning, the music would swell, crashing into bold, dramatic chords that made hearts pound and eyes widen. Each shift, each unexpected change added to the drama, the tension, the sheer beauty of what was happening. The audience could not look away, could not think about anything else. They were completely immersed. Her expression changed again, reflecting the emotions of the climax. Her eyes sparkled with intensity, her lips curved slightly in concentration, and her hands moved with a grace that seemed effortless. Yet anyone watching closely could see the focus, the years of practice, and the passion poured into every note. There was no performance in the theatrical sense. This was pure honesty, pure expression, pure music that touched every listener in a way that words could never describe. By the end of this fourth part, the room was filled with an almost tangible sense of wonder. The music had carried the audience on an emotional journey, from gentle beginnings to a powerful, breathtaking climax. People were leaning forward in their seats, some with tears in their eyes, some with wide smiles, all of them completely absorbed. They had come expecting a simple tune and instead had witnessed something transformative, a performance that would stay with them long after the final note, even as she paused for a brief moment. Letting her hands hover above the keys, the audience held its collective breath. No one moved, no one whispered, no one dared break the spell. They knew instinctively that the story was not yet finished, that the next notes would carry them even further, deeper into the music. And in that silence there was a shared thrill, a sense of awe, and the quiet, undeniable knowledge that they were witnessing something rare and unforgettable.